So what I wanted to show you today, I have an appointment at 12, so I'm coming here earlier than normal. I wanted to just give you some doodles to do. Now you're going to probably wonder, why would you want to do these doodles? The reason would be so that these are things you could add to like a wreath, or if you did place cards for your Thanksgiving table, and you might want to paint some of these doodles or any of your journaling, anything like that. So we got a few doodles here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've already went ahead and sketched everything out. So I just love fall. Fall is my favorite time. So the first thing we're going to do is an oak leaf. So I'm going to come in here and get a nice warm yellow, a nice cadmium yellow, and maybe some green gold, a little yellow ochre, and a sap green. Oops. I have to put my brush in the wrong green. So let's see. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have my oak leaf here. I'm just going to wet it with some clean water. I am using a number 2 silver black velvet series 3000S. And I am just going to wet my leaf first. We're just going to do a wet and wet. It's been a while since I did a live, so I could not get my microphone to work at first. And I'm sorry for people that were waiting. I saw that Teresa was waiting, and then she gave up on me, and that's okay. But, you know. All right. So I've got it wet. I'm just going to start just dropping in the colors. I'm going to go with this beautiful golden color first. I think this is a cadmium yellow. And then some of the sap green, maybe right beside of it onto the other lobe of the leaf. Just like so. Maybe some yellow ochre coming down toward the base of the leaf. And just let those mix and mingle right on the page. You don't have to pre-mix it. Let them mix and mingle. It makes a much more dynamic mix. And now I'm getting that green gold, and I'm just coming in here, and I'm trying to work fairly fast while it's still wet. And we're just going to finish this off with the green gold. We're going to let that dry. We're going to come back and add some details, but we're going to move on while this dries to another doodle. Oh, that's so pretty. I love that. I think I'm going to add just a little bit more sap green over here while it's still wet, and I still can. Yes, I am liking that. Now let's let that dry. We're going to move on to these acorns. So the first thing, of course, we're going to do is wet them, but don't wet the whole acorn. Leave a few slips, some little spots of dry paper. That'll be our highlight. We're going to start with our green gold. Our acorns are just turning brown, so we want a little bit of that green. And acorns are really a pretty green before they turn brown. Probably add a little bit of sap green too in there. And just try to avoid those areas that you left dry so that you'll have some little highlights on your acorn. Again, let that mix and mingle. Then while that's still wet, get you some burnt umber. A little bit of burnt umber. Can you see? Yeah, you can see. And don't worry, I'm going to leave this up, so if you couldn't make it, it'll be here in the group, and I may share it out onto YouTube. I don't know about that. We'll see. Depends on how I feel when I come back. So we are just going to dab some of that brown just around the edges. And you can even pull down some, pull down some lines where it's just starting to turn. We're going to do the same thing on this other acorn. I didn't send out an email. I usually do. I didn't have time. I'm still getting back in the swing of things. My hip is completely healed from getting my hip replacement. Well, it's not completely healed until a year, but on the end of this month, it'll be my 12 weeks. I am navigating my stairs, although I'm still very careful with my stairs, but I'm navigating those well, and it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. So we are just going to get some of this green gold in here, just like we did on the first one, leaving some dry parts of the acorn, not wetting the whole thing. Then we're going to come back in with a little bit of the green gold. I mean, not green gold. Well, I am adding a little bit more because it's so pale. With some of the sap green, just in some spots. And then we're going to come in with that burnt umber. And just go into some spots there. Now we're going to let that dry a little bit. While we're letting this, I think it needs a little bit more burnt umber there. This is not dark enough for me. So I'm just going to put a really concentrated, very little water in that burnt umber and just kind of drop it in there. Right there. We're going to do a little wash. Let's do it with this yellow ochre we already have out here. Let's do a little wash on the caps. And I'm leaving a little thin line of dry paper between the cap and the little acorn, the little actual nut, because I don't want these two to bleed together, and we can come back and go over that once it's dry. So just take a nice wash of yellow ochre and put that right on the little caps of the, I want to call it mushrooms, of the acorns. If I have called it mushrooms, just forgive me. It's early. I had a rough night and no telling what might come out of my mouth. Y'all know how I am. And we're just going to pull that up into the stem as well. Now we're going to let that dry. While that's drying, we're going to move over to the pumpkin. This pumpkin we're going to make orange. So we're just going to wet the section, but we're going to leave some of it dry, a little strip dry. And that's going to be our highlight. And then I am going to dip into some transparent orange. I really love this transparent orange. I have fallen in love with it. I use it on everything. It feels like I'm using it on everything lately. But I really, really like it. So, and we're going to just kind of avoid that highlight. And then we're going to come back with this cadmium yellow and just drop some yellow in there. That'll warm it up. And then we're going to come with the same clean water. And I did not leave any dry paper, but that's okay. It's okay. The way we're going to do that is we are just going to put that transparent orange around the edges and let the water make the highlight. And you can, if you like that look, I actually like that look better. I'm going to take some, while this is still wet, and just drop some water drops in there so that it'll look similar. I'm also going to come in here and get some of that cadmium yellow. I need to put a little bit more. And drop a little bit of that in there to warm that up. Being careful not to lose my highlight. We're going to do the same thing. And this is all it is. It's so simple, but they come out so pretty to me. You just wet those each section. See this line right here? Leave that line of dry paper so that it'll give it some form, and it gives you a visual separation between each section of the pumpkin. And you can come back later and just do like a light wet brush over it, and that'll spread that. I'll show you on this one, on my other one, but let's finish this first. So let's come in here with my transparent orange like I've been doing. And I did leave a little bit of wet or dry area there, and I'm just going to lift some of that. And come back in with my transparent orange now that I've got it really good and juicy and wet. And just drop that in there. Warm it up with some of this cadmium yellow in some spots. And then move on to the next one. So easy. Nothing to this. All right. Now we're just going to continue working around this pumpkin. Leaving a little bit of highlights. Leaving that white strip in between. Adding some more color. Some more yellow in there to warm it up. Gives it a nice mottled look. A nice variegation, varied look. And again with the transparent orange. Just add a little bit more where you want it darker. And then some of that cadmium yellow. There we go. Now this oak leaf has dried some, and what I'm going to do, I think I am going to do it a little different than I did it on the initial one. What I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet here and try to imagine where the veins would be. I'm going to come back in and drop in more color. In those areas. We're just going to experiment. I'm going to see if this works. And then on the other side of where I think the vein would be, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to wet it, but I'm leaving that vein dry. I'm not putting water on that. Nope, I got a little too far down. I got a little too happy. Get some of this. And I'm doing it again. I just keep going too far with it. I don't know why. I'm just doing it. Here, I know what will help. Well, where is my pencil at, people? Where's my pencil? Alright. I'll just draw this in so that I can see what I'm trying to avoid. And that way I won't go too far down. So I just lightly penciled in where I want those veins to be. And that will help me. So then I'm just going to wet this section, avoiding that vein, letting that vein be just a little bit lighter. Go in with my yellow ochre. Same thing, and you'll want to try to use the approximate colors that you used in the first layer on the second layer, just to darken them up and deepen them up. So just wet this. Go in here with some green. Ooh, that is some dark green. I think I'm going to come here, and I'm just trying to avoid where I think those veins would be. Trying to avoid those, keep those dry. Let me add something else here. Let's try this raw sienna. Really darken it up some. Now I don't like the way this is like yellow on one side and green on the other side, so I'm going to take some of that green, maybe a little bit of sap green, so that it looks like it belongs together. I'm going to do the same thing with some of this raw sienna here. And that's raw sienna, and it is mixed with just a tiny bit of that green gold. That way they look like they actually match each other. They're not just different sections of... have some continuity. And I'm going to do that same thing with this one too. I'll put some in there, put some there, so that they kind of go together. And then this bottom part is going to be mostly green gold with a little bit of sap green. I think I'm going to put some sap green in there. Now we're going to leave that. We're going to come back to this. We are going to take some burnt umber, pretty concentrated, and we're just going to start doing little texture marks. They're sort of little happy faces. We're going to put little happy faces on our acorns. Just our little smiles. There we go. And then we're going to let these dry, and then we're going to do a wash over those. That's just going to give it an indication of texture. You don't have to be perfect with it. You can if you want, but you don't have to be. And I'm going to take some of this burnt umber. It's going to be the shadows, and then blend it with a clean water in there. It's going to be the shadows on there. Let that dry. Let's do a little sap green pumpkin stem for this. You can even do like a little curly cues if you want. And fill that middle with a little bit of green gold. There. Now let's move on to this one, and what we're going to do is take some Naples yellow. It's sort of a creamy, buttery yellow, and it is more opaque than the rest of my colors, but we're going to do a wash of Naples yellow over this gourd, and we're going to let it dry, and you will see why later. But we'll let that dry because that's going to be the initial stripes. Remember, when you're thinking about watercolor, you want to paint light to dark. The lightest color of this gourd has a stripe in it. Let me show you what I mean. It has a stripe, that really yellow pale stripe. So that's what we're doing there first. We're going to let that go, let that dry. And then we are going to come back and paint over that. Now while that's drying, we're going to work on this pumpkin, and we're going to make it sort of one of those blue-gray pumpkins they've got going. So I'm getting some a little bit of Windsor green, a little bit of indigo, and I'm going to take a little bit of alizarin crimson just to knock it back just a teeny bit. Ooh, that was too much. Just to gray it down just a little bit, but I think I went overboard. All right, and this pumpkin's the same as the other pumpkin. You just want to wet it, leave a little white space, a little dry white of the paper without any water on it, and then drop this pretty blue-green color in. You can also go straight onto the paper like this, outline it. This is just another technique. And then take your clean water and just go right down the edges. There we go. This needs a little bit more color here, a little bit more color. But I think it works better if you wet it first. I think the wet on wet works a lot better. So just put a little water first. Leave that middle dry so you'll have a little highlight. Leave a little dry part right between each section so that it'll separate those sections. And I'm just taking a little, just kind of dabbing that up so that it's actually, what I think I'm going to do is drop some clean water in there. Ooh, that was a little bit too much. Let's soak some of it up. And that's called lifting, when you just take your brush, dry it off, and just lift some of the paint. But these will be really cute on cards, place cards. Make them bigger, and you could do like some home decor with them. Just anything your little heart desires, anything your imagination can think of. And then we are going to get this back here. I think I am going to get a little bit more of that blue-green, a little bit more indigo. And while it's still wet, I'm just going to come in here and drop some of that into some different areas. Give it more shadow. You want to work quickly. You want to try to do it while it's still wet. Some of my pumpkin is dried, so it's not as effective as I want, but again, it's a doodle. You could also put these in your bullet journal. You know, I've been bullet journaling or trying to learn how to bullet journal, and this would be really cool in those. All right, we're going to let that dry. Now we're going to come back to this. It should be dry enough. I'm just going to take a dark brown, probably a little burnt umber. I'm also mixing it with a little bit of raw sienna. I'm going directly onto that dry paper, and I am just going to do a light glaze over those. And I want it darker sort of near the edges and lighter in the center. So I add just a little bit more of that burnt umber right on the edges. A little bit more concentrated, which just means it has less water in it. And also add a few little texture marks to those branches. I'm just taking a little bit of clean water and blending that out. And then you can just take your wet brush and go over that white area, and it won't be like so white. It'll kind of cancel that out a little bit, but it's still light enough that it gives it a little bit of a highlight, a little bit of a life. And do the same thing there. Wipe a little bit of that up. There we go. Now, come back to this one. We're just going to take some Hooker's green, and we're going to paint in between the stripes. Leaving that beautiful yellow color about halfway up. Leaving a nice yellow stripe. Your yellow should be dry by now. All right, I'm going to get a little bit more concentrate, a little less water. When I say it's more concentrated, it just is a little less water, a little bit more paint. And we're going to put a little bit darker green, a little purlin green, right at the base where it's probably darker. While it's still wet, we're just going to drop that in there. And that'll give a little bit more dimension. I'll just do the little button there, a little blossom end. Now for the top part, we are going to go into our cadmium yellow, I think. Being careful not to get it mixed in with the green. And we are just going to do the upper stripes for the upper half. And I think that this needs a little bit of this just barely, you just barely be able to see that. There. And then where I want it to be a little bit darker, I am going to come in with a little bit of the raw sienna while it's still wet and just add a little bit, just touch it to that yellow and let the water do the work. Let the water blend it out. Now we're going to let that dry. And work on the, oh wait, let's give our little pumpkin a stem here. I'm gonna give him a darker stem, like with the same that we just used on that the gourd. There we go. Now I am going to go into my alizarin crimson and mix it with just a little bit of that beautiful transparent orange. Going to wet the tip of my maple leaf. And then I'm going to drop some of this gorgeous red in there. Oh, so pretty. It has a high flow. See how quickly it just devoured that water? I'm going to do the same thing on the tips of all of these. Just on the tips. And sweat it down. Then we want to take that mixture of alizarin crimson and a little bit of transparent orange. Now we're going to go straight into the transparent orange. And we are going to do our next little level of that. Ooh. And then we are going to go into the cadmium yellow. Finish that off. And I think I'm going to touch just a tiny bit of that red to the very tips of these bottom ones. And if you want to add some green, you can do that too. I'm not going to add any green to that one, but I think I'm going to add it to this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and wet this little smaller leaf with some clean water. And I'm going to take some of the sap green. I'm just going to put it right in the center. I'm going to take some of that cad yellow, go around that. And then I'm going to just take the orange, the transparent orange. Put that on there. just on those little tips. There. Let that dry. We'll come back in and maybe do some veins on that. Now let's do our little mushroom cap. I'm just going to do the whole thing in water. I'm going to take a little bit of Windsor purple, put it on the top. It's going to sort of be like our little light reflection. Put that on the top and take some burnt sienna. Gonna wake it up, it's dried up. While it's wet, let that just sort of blend in. You can leave some white areas. See how I did this one? I left some white areas just to give it a highlight. Let's see. So I'm going to do the same thing on this one. And then we are going to go ahead and put a little bit of that purple on the top of this little baby mushroom. Come in with that burnt sienna. And then I left some of that paper dry so that we could make cleaner, more clear-cut highlights than on this one. Than I did on that one, but that's okay. Now I'm going to take some of this purple and just put it on the stem. And I'm going to take some of that Naples yellow that we used earlier. It's that creamy yellow. I'm just going to do a really fine wash of it, a really watery wash of that. And if you want to, you can drop a little bit into your mushroom cap, some of that Naples yellow, just so that we can have, you know, continuity in our colors. We're gonna let that dry. While that's drying, we are gonna work on some wheat, and I am gonna go with my yellow ochre. I've mixed it with all these browns I have here. We're gonna make it pretty watery, and this is it's supposed to be sort of like wheat. So all you're doing is just touching your brush and making sort of elongated ovals with points on the end. Tip and then smush it down. Tip and then smush it down. Wheat's probably not this long. These should probably be shorter. But you can make yours however you want to. However short or long you want the little grains. That's up to you. It's your painting. And just continue on down that stem line. And then you just do the same thing on the other stems. You just put the point down and then just drag that brush across the paper. And you can come back and just do some little tiny lines at the tip. It makes it look a little bit more like wheat. Although these are really not the right shape, but it's all right. It makes a nice fall foliage. Next, we're going to work on the berries. So I've got my alizarin crimson up here. And I'm just going to go with the alizarin crimson straight onto dry paper. I got too much on my brush. Leave a little highlight. So leave some of that paper white. We'll for the highlight, so leave it dry. These are just little simple berries. There's nothing to them. But they would look really good on a painted wreath as sort of filler. And if you do decide to make a wreath, which I'm probably going to make one soon and put it on YouTube. I'm going to paint one and put it on YouTube. You'll want to start with your largest elements first. Like if you're going to put the pumpkin in the wreath, start with the pumpkin first. Now I'm just going to take this really dark green and make the little branches. There we go. Now this is dried enough. I'm going to come in with a little bit of mixture of raw sienna, burnt sienna, and just add a little bit of darkness toward the stem. Gives it a little bit more dimension. So we're just kind of sticking it in there. This one's still a little bit wet, so it's going to blend a little bit more, but that's fine. That is perfectly fine. Now I'm just going to draw the stem in with some of this brown. Just go over it, darken it up. Now let's come back to the mushrooms. A little bit of burnt sienna. They're still, no, they're not that wet. So we can just add in some darker, shadowy colors. And a little bit of texture. And that is straight onto the dry paper. Then I'm just taking this top part with some clean water and blending that out. And I might add a little bit more of that Windsor Violet to that top part. While it's still a little bit damp, we just dampened it. Just add a little bit more. And then here we are going to do some, there's a little shadow from the other mushroom on this one. So we're just taking the Windsor Violet and adding that on there, and then just darkening up some of this area on this little tiny mushroom. His little companion here. There. Now we don't have much left to do. If you want, now I'm going to show you how to do sort of some, let's see. Let's add a little phthalo blue to this blue-green mixture we have down here. The one that we used for this pumpkin, I'll use a little bit of phthalo blue. And then we're going to do some eucalyptus. Ooh, that is too green for eucalyptus. That is green. Let's take some of this red and knock that back a little bit. Let's gray that up with some of this red. Some of this alizarin crimson. We don't want it to be so bright green. And you just start at the top, and they are side-by-side leaves on eucalyptus. They sort of connect at the stem. Look like little boobies side by side, sort of. So that's all you do with those, just right down the stem. Sort of elongated ovals a little bit. And got a little stem sticking out here. And this blue color looks really good with like the oranges of the pumpkins, and add a little bit of spice to your florals, your fall florals. And if you want to come back and add a little bit darker, I'll get a little bit more of that red in there so it's a little darker, and just touch it while it's still wet. Oop, that one's not wet, but I'm still just going to touch it, and that'll just give it a little bit more dimension into some of those leaves. Looks better. And you can just go ahead and define that branch in the middle with that darker color. Now I'm going to try to do some mums, I guess they're called, and I am going to do those with sort of a magenta. So I want it to be really, really watery at first. So we are just going to do this in layers. So we're going to put the first layer down, just a nice wash, really light. And I don't know if this is going to work. It didn't work so well on my first attempt. So we're going to try it again. While we're waiting for that to dry, we're just going to take a little bit of this orange and just do a little bit of veining in our little maple and in our oak leaf. We're just going to kind of go along those veins, give that a little bit more dimension there too. You could even do some little side veins if you want. It's up to you. And we are almost done. All we got to do is finish this one. What I'm going to do is just add another layer of this maroon, this magenta color. And just do it in sort of petal shapes around the center. You know, chrysanthemums or mums, they have so many layers of petals. But really, I'm just trying to do a doodle that will give you a little pop of color if you want to, you know, have something different. I'm just going to do little tiny dashes in there. I'm going to let that dry. Go around this other one. I don't have my dryer plugged in, or I would dry it in between and that would make it look better. And then on the outside, you could take a little bit of a darker alizarin crimson or something and mix it in there. And then just do some outside petals. I'm not loving this, but it's a nice little doodle. And that's all it is. I'm going to have to work on this one. But everything you do is not going to be beautiful, even if you want it to be. Sometimes you're going to have flops, and I think I'm going to call that one a flop. If you want to, you can come in there and add a little bit of cadmium yellow just to the center. Come in and add some leaves. Just a little brush is too dry. Good enough. I think it's good enough. If you want to, you could take some white gouache. I got a little dried right here, and mix it into some of your watercolor and kind of go in the center and do a little bit of lighter petals and just sort of overlap, because mums have all those millions of zillions of petals just layered on top of each other. But that's okay. So there we go. That is all of the fall doodles I'm going to show you today. I did tell you that I was going to show you how to soften if you don't like the white, that stark white. Just take some clean water and go up and down, and some of that orange will sort of bleed over it. If it's not enough orange for you, you can get just a tiny bit on your brush from your palette, and that softens those lines up so that they're not just stark white if you don't like that look. I'll put this other one so you can see this one's got the stark white. This one we have sort of softened with some clean water. I prefer that one, but you may prefer that. So thank you for watching. I'm going to leave this up in the group so that whoever couldn't make it live, y'all will see it. I may put this on YouTube, but thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.